Hi guys, it's Lauren. Welcome back to my channel. And in this video, I am going to be telling you guys about the case of Riley Fox. And this is a doozy. This is probably going to be, no, it is going to be the longest video on my channel to date. Not that that takes much, but there's so much information to go over, so many details, and I hope that by the end of this video, anybody watching this is equally as mad, angry, enraged, infuriated as I was last night when I finished this research. I'm filming it literally the next day because I needed to get all my thoughts out there, and I just needed to tell you guys this story. So buckle up. This is going to be a very long, bumpy journey to the very end and to finally get the justice that was deserved. And without further ado, let's get into the video. So Kevin and Melissa Fox met in high school at a volleyball game, and Kevin was actually really shy, so Melissa is the one who made the first move and asked him to homecoming. They both lived in the small town of Wilmington, Illinois, and they eventually started dating. Their relationship quickly grew. They spent as much time as they possibly could together. And even when Kevin went off to college at Illinois State University, the two promised to make the relationship work. However, shortly after Kevin left for college, 18-year-old Melissa found out that she was pregnant. And now this is where things kind of differ a little bit. One source I found said that Kevin got super overwhelmed. He was not ready to be a father yet, so the two actually broke up for the time being. But they eventually got back together when Kevin realized he had to take responsibility for this child, and to be frank, he knew that Melissa was the love of his life and was the girl that he wanted to marry. The other source said that Kevin came back from college instantly after receiving the news, and the two got married in the year of 2000. They both agreed that they wanted to raise their children in Wilmington, and Kevin actually grew up and lived basically all of his life in that town. Him and his brother Chad would fish, they would ride bikes together, and they both graduated from the only high school in that town. Their house had been in their family for generations before them. And just a little side note, Wilmington is 60 miles southwest of Chicago, which is where Illinois State University is located. It's a nice old-fashioned little city along Route 66, and it's known for its picturesque parks and even the Kankakee River. Melissa's family moved to Wilmington when she was in 3rd grade. Her father was a passionate fisherman who unfortunately found out that he had cancer, so he wanted to live out the rest of his days along the peaceful river. There was hardly any crime in this area whatsoever, and so many slept with their doors unlocked. In 1997, Melissa gave birth to their first child named Tyler, and then in 2001, they gave birth to Riley. Kevin worked as a union painter while Melissa was a waitress, but I also read somewhere that she ended up being a stay-at-home mom with the kids. On the weekend of June 5th and 6th in 2004, Melissa left Wilmington to participate in a breast cancer walk in Chicago. She stayed at a campsite with friends that Saturday night in Skokie, and this was one of the first times she ever left her children overnight. But to her, obviously, this was for a good cause. That same night, Kevin went to a street festival in Chicago, and he went with one of Melissa's brothers, Tony, and then another friend as well. He left Tyler and Riley with Melissa's mom, Sandy, and the group went to a restaurant after the festival as well. They stayed there until about 10:30 p.m. Kevin admitted to having a few drinks that night, but he said that he was sober when it came time to drive home. And so he eventually arrived at his mother-in-law's house at about 12:50 a.m. to pick up the kids. He wanted them to get up bright and early the next morning so they could drive to Chicago and watch Melissa cross the finish line. When they got home, he had the kids just sleep in the living room. Earlier that day, Melissa washed all the bed sheets, and he was tired, he was exhausted, he was lazy, he just really didn't feel like making up the beds at that moment. So he just had Riley and Tyler both sleep on the furniture in the living room. Kevin put blankets on both the children. He went outside to smoke a cigarette. He came in, went to his room, watched TV, and fell asleep. The next morning, Kevin got woken up by Tyler at around 7:50 a.m., basically saying Riley was gone. Kevin, still being half asleep and honestly not overly concerned, didn't think too much of it. He was thinking, the kids play hide and seek all the time. They'll go over to the neighbor's house to play. When he went downstairs, he didn't really panic when he saw the blanket that Riley had, but no Riley. He did notice that the front door was open, but he assumed that Tyler had just opened it to look for his sister. So they went around, Kevin looked in every single room, and Riley was nowhere to be found. He also noticed the back door was open, but that was also not super strange because the back door had a broken lock. So they would have a clothes basket that they would put in front of the door to keep it closed. The clothes basket was put to the side, so there was really nothing to consider strange. He looked outside but still could not find Riley, so he went next door where supposedly one of Riley's best friends lived. She would go over there to play quite frequently, but when he went up to the front door, he didn't see any movement, he didn't hear anything, so instead of knocking, he went back home and called them. Unfortunately, they had not seen Riley either. Finally, after 40 minutes of looking around the house and the surrounding property, Kevin called 411, not 911 because he said that was only for extreme emergencies. So at this moment, Kevin was still thinking and hoping that Riley had just wandered off somewhere and that she would return eventually, because nothing bad ever happens in Wilmington. So the local officer that received the call actually knew the family, but this isn't really a surprise because Wilmington was such a small community. The police force was made up of about a dozen officers. So the officer drove to the Fox residence where him and Kevin initiated a search. And at this point, news started spreading about this missing girl. Some of Kevin's family also came to assist in the search. And then another call came in from a nearby neighbor. They were reporting a suspected break-in, but nothing seemed to have been missing from their home. A general description was released of what Riley was last seen wearing, which was a white t-shirt with a pink flamingo on it and pink capri pants. During the search, Kevin got a call from Melissa, and this is when she found out her daughter was missing. So her and her friend came right back to Wilmington, and they instantly see people everywhere. She ran to Kevin to get the latest update. She was terrified, she was confused, and during this encounter, a police officer supposedly heard Melissa say to Kevin, "You better not have done anything stupid." Now, over 500 people were out searching. They had people on horseback, on bicycles, on any other vehicle you can probably imagine. And by 2:30, the police finally activated an Amber Alert. However, before the Amber Alert could even go out, they got news that they were dreading. A mother and her daughter, who were actually helping in the search, decided to widen their radius a little bit. So they went into the forest reserve known as Forsyth Woods. As they got near the river, they spotted something that looked kind of like a plastic bag. However, when they got closer, they realized it was actually the body of a small child face down. She was in the water. Her previously white flamingo shirt was now brown and it was soaking wet. It had mud and dirt all over the place. Her body was cold and stiff. She was naked from the waist down. Her mouth was duct taped and her wrists were bound together. Search of the area was conducted and the police collected a few items, one of them being a pair of sneakers found half a mile from her body in the water. This item will come in handy at the very end, so just keep that in mind. Remember that fact. The police asked the Fox couple to come down to the station, and they agreed, not aware that their little girl had been found. When they got to the station, they were questioned separately. Melissa was mainly questioned about Kevin, and eventually, after about an hour, the couple was reunited. This is when they were told that Riley was found. They were angry. They were angry that this happened. They were angry that they were not told sooner. Melissa was in shock while Kevin was screaming, he was sobbing, he was hitting things, he was hitting the walls, he was kicking things, like he was livid. Like I said, they were angry that they were not told right away. And Melissa said later on that she thinks it's either because A, the police didn't really know how to react about the fact that there was a murder. They never had to deal with this before. Or B, they wanted to see how the couple would react to their daughter's death. 5 days after the murder was Riley's viewing. It was held at St. Rose Catholic because that was the largest church in the town, and it had to accommodate for how many people wanted to attend. She was in a small, polished white casket with stainless steel handles, and she was in her princess dress. There was a dress that she wore to her uncle, so Kevin's brother's wedding, and she was so excited about it. She loved that dress, and like I said, they called it the princess dress. And she looked so stinking cute in that dress. So they put her in that dress for her burial. Over 6,000 people attended this viewing, and that's about 1,000 more than the Wilmington population. Hundreds more went to the funeral the next day, and many wore pink ribbons, pink ties, and/or butterfly pins. Police and/or detectives attended the service with video cameras scanning the crowd and Kevin. Many said, including the detectives I believe, that they were not acting like a normal couple. But I think we all know, as true crime fans, we all know that nobody grieves the same. Nobody grieves exactly, picture perfectly how you would expect. Everyone grieves differently. So that was just a very uncalled for comment, I feel like, that was made. And now the public started to spread rumors about the family. For starters, they got a new car. They were upset that they got a new car. They thought it was suspicious. The family also went on 2 vacations, one to Las Vegas and the other to the Ozarks. So they thought that was very weird as well. They also thought it was strange and suspicious that Melissa got a new haircut, which doesn't really make sense to me, but I feel like at this point they were reaching for reasons to kind of be upset with these people. And the public's reasoning behind this is they think that the family was using the money donated to help find Riley's killer for their personal use instead, which I guess is kind of understandable, but eventually the family explains everything. They got a new car because the other one just reminded them too much of Riley. They would take little trips with her, they would just kind of drive around town with her, and they just didn't need the constant reminder. They went to Las Vegas and the Ozarks because they had 2 weddings to attend to. And then Melissa just got a new haircut. And for the record, those 2 weddings were already paid for in advance before Riley was ever murdered. They were planned and paid for way ahead of time. The public was also confused because the family didn't offer a reward for any information. However, it was later brought to light that the police said it wasn't necessary. The next day, the couple went back down to the station and they got fingerprinted, they got DNA collected, and the clothes that Kevin wore the night before. They were also introduced to the Will County detective that was going to take over the case, Scott Swearingen. Then the couple was told that their daughter was sexually assaulted and that she was thrown from the bridge overlooking the Forked River. This brought so many questions. They said that she died from homicidal drowning, and the medical examiner did get as many DNA samples from Riley's body as they could. Those samples were going to be sent off to the Illinois State Crime Lab for analysis. So Melissa and Kevin had no idea at the time, but the detectives suspected that Kevin was covering up an accident. However, he continued acting like a supportive cop. He didn't want to give anything away. He didn't want to be acting suspicious. Melissa and Kevin both understood that the family had to be cleared first. That's how majority of these types of cases go. So they were doing everything they could to cooperate. And Kevin's family even tried to encourage him, strongly encourage him, to get a lawyer. And he said he had nothing to hide. He's like, the DNA is going to clear me. Like, there's no reason to get an attorney. He even said that he was raised with the idea that authorities are good people and should be respected. 16 days after Riley's body was found, Detective Scott asked if Tyler wanted to go somewhere for free counseling. Instead, they came across Mary Jane Pluth, who was a forensic interviewer. She was given permission to interview Tyler, and her manner was kind of like a strict school teacher. So the questioning started out very basic, such as where Tyler lived, what hobbies and sports he enjoyed. And Tyler was very shy, so he was very quiet. Then he was asked what Kevin did or didn't do that night, if he left the house, and Tyler kept shaking his head no, but he did nod once. Then he's asked what Kevin did when he left, if he took Riley somewhere, and he kept shaking his head no, and eventually he said no. Then he was asked where Riley was taken, and he starts sobbing. He asks for his mommy and his daddy. However, the questioning still continues. About an hour later, Tyler is in a fetal position. He is sobbing. He is struggling to breathe. Eventually, he's offered a box of tissues and he rejects them. And by the end, Tyler had said no at least 178 times. What it seems like Kevin didn't know when he signed the consent form is that detectives were watching from a one-way mirror. So they were watching how Tyler reacted to things and kind of evaluating it more. So later that afternoon, Detective Michael Guilfoyle took Tyler back to the Fox residence. And this time there were no cameras recording. Apparently, Tyler got more specific and descriptive and said that his father did in fact take Riley somewhere in the middle of the night. He seemed more unsure as the detective pressed him, but he did say that his father used the dryer when he got back. Now, this is all coming from the detective who supposedly talked to him. And water usage reports do prove that the washer was never used, so that at least possibly checks out. But what's interesting is that the summary that the detective wrote up apparently just disappeared at some point. Like, later on in the case, it is mentioned that it cannot be found. That is very odd. And that is the very first thing that in my mind when I was doing this research, I was like, something is not right. Also, going off of the detective's account, the boy would say things that contradicted known facts. Like, for example, when Kevin put Riley in PJs. And Kevin and Melissa were never told what Tyler said until way later down the road. Throughout the next few months, nothing really happened in the investigation. However, detectives were following Kevin and Melissa very closely, which they were obviously not aware of. In September, Melissa found out from a friend that a child was abducted from a house in LaPorte, Indiana. This is about an hour and a half from Wilmington, and so Melissa brings it up to Detective Scott. She's like, there has to be some type of connection, like, can you look into it? And he didn't seem very interested. He also didn't seem to be aware of the fact that another child had went missing only an hour and a half away. So a tip came in claiming that the surveillance footage from a gas station might show the Fox's Ford Escape on camera the morning that Riley disappeared. But remember, Kevin's alibi is that he was sleeping all night. Investigators were also somehow able to place this vehicle on the path to Forsyth Woods. And I want to make this clear that the footage they are looking at is so fuzzy and so unrecognizable that you cannot tell that that car is a Ford Escape. You cannot tell the license plate. You cannot identify anything other than the fact that it is an SUV. That is the only thing that is painfully obvious from this footage. And the detectives were trying so hard to make sure that they were able to place this vehicle at the crime scene with Kevin behind the wheel. So 5 months have passed and the public is demanding answers. There was also a huge election going on where the current state attorney, Jeff Tomczak, was up for re-election. And he was going head to head with Jim Gasglow, who he apparently had bad blood with. And having an unsolved murder in Jeff's jurisdiction really did not bode well for him. And on October 21st, Jeff's father, Donald, was actually arrested on a federal indictment on the hired truck scandal in Chicago. There were also allegations that he made illegal contributions to his son's campaign. By late October, Kevin was the prime suspect. According to Will County's sheriff's spokesperson, Pat Berry, there was nothing to eliminate him. Everything they had was pointing to Kevin. At 7 p.m. on October 26th, Melissa and Kevin were called back down to the station, and they were told that there was a break in the case, that they have more information. So they were so excited to come down to the station and learn once and for all who might have done this to their little girl. However, that is not what happened. The detectives lied, to put it blatantly. Kevin was taken to an interrogation room where he was interrogated for 14 hours. And only 20 minutes of that was actually recorded. He was threatened, he was intimidated, and he was mentally abused. They asked him why he called the non-emergency line instead of 911. Why would Tyler say those things about his own father? Did he know that his car was spotted passing a gas station at 4 a.m.? And Kevin responded with he called 411 because he didn't want to panic right away. He didn't know Tyler said those things, and maybe he was confused. Maybe he saw him go out for a smoke. And he said he had no idea how his car showed up on that surveillance footage, and he even got sarcastic. He said, "Oh, somebody must have come in my house, gotten my keys, taken my car, and driven to this gas station and returned it without me knowing." The detectives did not understand sarcasm, and they dead ass thought that this was his way of possibly getting an alibi. Kevin was livid at this point. He was angry, and he would try to leave, and the detectives would tell him, "Sit your ass down." He asked for a lawyer numerous times, and they ignored him every single time. And Melissa was still waiting for him. She had no idea what was going on, and she was getting angry because nobody was coming to talk to her. So she started kicking the door, and she was yelling, saying, "Somebody better come tell me what's going on." So finally, one of the detectives was able to step away and talk to her. He told her that Kevin was the main suspect, and she freaked out. She said, "That is not possible. He would never do something like this." So the detectives just flat out tell Kevin that they think he knows more than he's telling them. And they also told Melissa that they think Kevin is covering up an accident. They proceeded to say that they think Kevin accidentally bumped her head somehow and that she appeared dead. So he decided to duct tape her, bound her wrists together, and sexually assault her to make it look like a kidnapping. Melissa was furious. She said that if anybody sexually assaulted her daughter, she would know about it. She would be able to tell. She also said that it doesn't make any sense that Kevin would not even attempt to revive their child, considering he was literally CPR certified. She did admit that when they brought up the fact that their car was on camera, that made her second guess herself a little bit. Kevin and Melissa were reunited around midnight, and at this point, Kevin's father and Melissa's brother were at the station as well. According to the sheriff's summary, when Kurt Fox told the detectives that he wanted them to stop interrogating his son, they told him, "Your son is 27 years old, and he came to the station voluntarily." And then when Kevin would ask for an attorney multiple times and his father, the detectives said, "You are 27 years old, you don't need your father." He then told him that he needed to take a polygraph test before he left. And they told him if he passed it, he'd be able to leave, they would stop questioning him, and they would know he was innocent. If he failed, he'd be arrested on the spot. Unfortunately, he failed. According to the family's legal team, however, those results were unreliable at best. Melissa knew something wasn't right. She told her husband that everything was going to be okay, and he looked her in the eyes and said, "I did not do this." And that's when Detective Ed Hayes got in Melissa's face. He said, and I quote, "Your husband killed your daughter, and he doesn't love you or her." Melissa told him not to talk to her that way, not to talk to her husband that way, and not to talk to her family that way. later on, she said that she thinks the reason Ed got so upset is because of the fact that Melissa simply believed her husband. However, through his attorney, Ed denied these allegations, and according to the sheriff's summary report, Melissa was expressing doubts about her husband's innocence. So Kevin was taken back to the interrogation room once again, and he was forced to watch one of the detectives fill out an arrest sheet for first-degree murder in front of him. He was threatened, majorly. They said that they know people at the jail. They will make sure that Kevin gets raped every day until he tells them what he wants to hear. The detective straddled Kevin's legs, grabbed the back of his shirt, and pulled him close. He basically said his family doesn't love him, so just admit that he did it. Admit that he killed his daughter. Then Kevin was showed pictures of his daughter, naked below the waist, duct taped, and one of the detectives said that Riley is in the room with you right now. She's in pain and she needs closure. So now they go back to the accident theory. They tell him to say it was an accident. If he passed this up, he was going to spend life in prison. If he said it was an accident, he would be charged with involuntary manslaughter and only spend about 3 to 5 years in jail. For the record, promising a suspect leniency for a confession is forbidden under Illinois law. Yet this interrogation was not videotaped, so it was just the detective's words against Kevin's. So Kevin realized the only way to get them to back off is for him to confess and then clear his name the next day. So he confessed. He said he came home at 1:30 a.m., he had a snack, he watched TV. At 2:15 a.m., he went to the bathroom, swung the door open quickly, and hit Riley, knocking her down. She appeared lifeless, so he panicked, carried her to the car, and grabbed some duct tape. He considered driving to his mother-in-law's house or the hospital, but then he decided to make it look like an abduction. He duct taped her mouth, bound her wrists, and then drove to the bridge over Forsyth Creek. He carried her down a muddy embankment, slipping on the way. He put his finger inside of her to make it look like she was sexually assaulted. He placed her in the water, went home, cried, and fell asleep. Now, Riley's underwear was never found, so they asked Kevin what he did with her underwear. He said he put it in the creek. Basically, detectives told him he could not say that because they searched that creek and never found her underwear. So he changed his story and said he stopped at a store on the way home and threw them in the dumpster. Just before being booked and taken to jail, Kevin heard the detectives congratulating themselves and laughing about the fact that he was finally put behind bars. Many questions were left unanswered after his confession. Like, why did he not attempt CPR when he was CPR certified? Why was no duct tape found? If Kevin slipped in the mud, why were his clothes not muddy? How could a lightweight door knock a little girl down to the point where she looked like she was dead? Where were her capri pants? She was wearing these pink capri pants, and they were not found either. And why was there no evidence in their Ford Escape? Kevin immediately met with a lawyer, but unfortunately it was too late. The news about his confession got out everywhere. And the main reason for that was because Jeff Tomczak from the district attorneys, the one up for re-election, told the media and everybody about Kevin's confession. And is now a good time to say that Kevin was in fact going to be charged with first-degree murder? They lied when they said he was going to be charged with involuntary manslaughter. They just wanted to hear what they wanted to hear. And of course, he was facing the death penalty. So Melissa and Kevin's family hired an attorney by the name of Kathleen Zellner. And I'm not sure if that name sounds familiar to anybody, but basically, if you watched the documentary on Netflix, Making a Murderer, Kathleen Zellner was actually Stephen Avery, well, I'm sure still is, Stephen Avery's attorney. And I am a huge fan of that documentary, so I just think this is really cool. Obviously, this happened way before the case of Stephen Avery, so this was kind of before she was so well known. But now she's really well known for being able to get convictions overturned for her clients when they were quite obviously wrongfully convicted. Kevin's bond was set to $25 million, and majority of Kevin's family knew he was innocent, but majority of the public really thought he was guilty. And Kathleen advised them to, instead of trying to make money to get him out on bond, just make money to get him free altogether. Now this next part makes my blood boil. So Tom Zach decided to make a statement that made the Chicago Tribune that said Riley was sexually assaulted throughout life. So obviously this triggered an investigation, and 6 months later, the Illinois Family Services basically said that this doesn't seem to be the case. And Riley's pediatrician also said there was nothing to ever suggest she was ever sexually assaulted or sexually abused. Another thing is that Detective Ed Hayes called the FBI to put a stop to the DNA testing. The only reason I can ever even remotely think a detective would want to put a stop to DNA testing, especially involved in a murder case, is because he knows that the results are going to show that the guy they are trying to put behind bars is innocent. And the last thing is that during Kevin's initial hearing, Tom Zach said that the autopsy revealed that Riley was alive and was struggling when she was placed underwater. Why is this weird? Because the forensic pathologist that did the autopsy signed an affidavit saying that he never spoke to this detective about the results of the autopsy or his opinion on Riley being alive when she was underwater. On November 2nd, 6 days after Kevin's arrest, Glasgow beat Tom Zach 121,000 to 112,000 votes for the state attorney's race. Now, this was exciting for the family and everyone trying to prove that Kevin was innocent, because Tom Zach was the root of a lot of problems in this investigation. Glasgow seemed like a more fair man, they said, but unfortunately, Glasgow did not show any indication that he wanted to drop the charges against Kevin, and in fact promised to pursue the death penalty. So Kathleen got to work reenacting every part of Kevin's confession to find loopholes and little things that just don't add up. Supposedly, Kevin placed the body at the bottom of the bridge in the water, slipping as he fell. However, when one of Kathleen's assistants tried to do the same thing with a 40-pound bag, the bag was blocked with debris. However, when the bag was thrown from the bridge, it floated to where the body was found. Kathleen said that the bathroom door that was supposedly used to knock Riley out was paper thin. And even Kevin said you'd have to literally use a hammer to get the effect that they needed. Later, Tom Zach accused Kevin of lying during his confession to hide his guilt in molesting his daughter. During all of this, the family finally offered a reward. Christmas passed, New Year's passed, and Kevin's 28th birthday passed, and he was still in jail. He was moved to protective custody, but he was still being threatened for his life and threatened to be raped. And he said he felt like he was a zoo animal in a zoo. He said people would literally come and stare at him and just sit in front of his cell, staring at him all day. Kevin's hearing was on January 28th, 2005. Prosecutors turned over several police reports to Kathleen and her defense team, and as far as the DNA evidence goes, those rape kits did not have enough genetic material to be able to be tested. However, Kathleen nor Glasgow realized that the FBI never tested Riley's DNA. In fact, a day after the election, an order came in from the sheriff's office telling the FBI to stop the testing, which, like I said before, we now know was from Detective Ed Hayes. While Kathleen was reviewing the state crime lab report for testing of male saliva, she was a little conflicted about what the inconclusive meant. So she called a forensic scientist, and basically she was told that it means wherever it was tested, whatever lab it was at, does not have the capabilities to be able to test it properly. So she got a court order to have it tested by a private lab in Virginia, and the judge ordered it to be sent immediately and tested immediately. But 3 weeks have gone by and the lab still had not received these samples. On April 5th, she found out the DNA was sent to the state crime lab, not Virginia, and then returned to Joliet. Who was behind this mix-up? Ed Hayes. This delay enraged the family, rightfully so, and they were even more upset when they found out it was going to take about 2 months for the testing to be complete. They were also told that they shouldn't get their hopes up because there was such little genetic material to test that it was a very slim chance there was going to be any male saliva found. However, on June 7th, male saliva was found, and they had just enough to get a full DNA profile. The next day, they compared it with Kevin's DNA. Kevin was not even close to being a match. Obviously, the family wanted him released immediately, but they had to follow protocol and wait for the final report to be submitted. 8 days later, the results got there. Glasgow was shocked, but he agreed that he had to let Kevin go. He spent 243 days in jail. That's 8 months, but fortunately, he was freed and all charges were dropped. 9 days later, Chad and Stacy packed over 100 t-shirts with the sayings, "Test before arrest," and 376 days of a killer on the loose. They drove to the courthouse where Kevin was originally charged, and let me tell you, there were people everywhere. There was a lot of celebration going on. As Glasgow announced Kevin's innocence, he started sobbing. He was so relieved, and he actually lost 20 pounds when he was in jail. He was asked what he wanted to do on his first day out, and he said spend it with his wife and son, which he had dreamed of doing since this all started. Apparently, at a press conference, Glasgow actually said that he thought this whole case was mishandled. He said specifically with the DNA testing and the delay. Since Kevin's release, there has been a completely new set of investigators on this case, and Kathleen filed a lawsuit on behalf of the Fox family in November of 2004. This was claiming violation of due process, malicious prosecution, false imprisonment, and defamation. The original defendants involved were Detectives Edward Hayes, Scott Swearingen, Michael Guilfoyle, John Rudiger, Brad Wachtel, and David Dabrowski. Jeff Tomczak was added in July of 2005. They also added the polygraph examiner Mary Jane Pluth, Paul Koppes, a jail guard, and Jeanette Bishop Green. The defendants sought to have these claims dismissed, saying that prosecutors were immune to claims like this, but the judge ultimately rejected their arguments, and there was only one exception, which was Sheriff Koppes. Now, this story is not over quite yet. You're probably wondering what actually happened to Riley, who murdered her, and the whole story behind that. And it's going to make you so angry because everything we just discussed could have been 100% avoided. Shortly after Riley's body was found, detectives found a pair of muddy shoes in the water, and on the inside tongue of those shoes was the name Ebby. The only reason those shoes ended up in evidence is because one of the locals assisting in the search at the time insisted that they take them to the evidence locker. However, the police never connected it with any other clues. So Riley's actual killer was a man by the name of Scott Ebby. Those shoes that they found were his prison shoes from his previous time in jail, and he was out on parole at the time of the murder. In a 5-page letter, Scott Ebby admitted that on June 6, 2004, he had been drinking and doing drugs. He was going around the neighborhood of Wilmington and trying to break into people's houses, steal things, and the Fox's residence just happened to be one of them. He said the back door lock was already broken, so he just walked right on in. He didn't find anything of value in their house, and he was about to leave, but he got fixated on the little girl. He had a bandana on, he put his hand over her mouth, took her to the trunk of his car, and drove to the forest reserve. He duct taped her mouth and wrists and sexually assaulted her on the floor of the men's bathroom. He said that eventually his bandana either slid down or he pulled it down a little bit, but regardless, Riley saw him and he knew that she would be able to identify him. He panicked, and that is when he took her to the water and held her underwater until she stopped struggling. And just a little fun fact, at the time of his confession, Ebby was already in prison for another sexual assault charge. In the year of 2010, Scott Ebby was charged with first-degree murder and predatory sexual assault. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and he passed away at 52 years old by killing himself. So the couple got a multi-million-dollar settlement for the whole thing that they went through, and I'm pretty sure I read that it was $8 million that they received. The Fox family pushed for passage of Riley's Law, which expedites DNA testing after child murders. The Little family did move out of Wilmington and into Naperville. They just wanted a fresh start. From the year of 1997 to 1999, over 50,000 children were abducted from people other than their family members. Kevin and Melissa gave birth to a baby girl on March 8th, 2006 named Tegan. Unfortunately, the couple did end up splitting. Melissa does have a new boyfriend. I'm not sure if their fiance married now. I'm not really sure about all the details on that. They said that after everything, it was just super hard for them to kind of rekindle that connection and that love for each other, but they still respect each other a lot. They didn't have any bad blood, and unfortunately, Kevin actually did pass away last year in a car accident, which I was really sad when I saw that article. Riley was sweet, she was bright, she was bubbly, she liked to sing, dance, tell jokes, catch butterflies. She was just such a sweet girl, and it was just such a tragedy in the little town of Wilmington, and I'm sure people probably started locking their doors after this. Just like every case that starts out in a small town where nothing bad ever happens, there's always that one thing that causes people to start being more cautious, and unfortunately this little girl is that. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you disliked it, give it a thumbs down. I don't really care. Subscribe if you're new. Comment down below videos you'd like to see next. Please let me know your guys' thoughts on this case down below. How Kevin was treated so horribly for something he literally did not do. And it's just so heartbreaking to think that the justice system literally failed him so bad, and I'm just so glad that they were finally able to get answers after going through such a traumatic experience. It just really sucks that the detectives were so incompetent, the whole police force was so incompetent, and I understand that they didn't really know how to deal with things like this. This doesn't happen in Wilmington, but it did. And they didn't know how to act. They didn't know what to do. They made a man's life a living hell. So with all that being said, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.